Well, jeepers! You're listening to Smash or Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another interview on the JayBee and Milly channel. I am JayBee and of course with me is Milly.
Hi.
And the special guest who will be interviewing today is Adam Beechen. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for inviting me. It's fun to be here.
Well, it's absolutely incredible to have you here today, of course, with a great history of writing, comic books and teleplays and animation as well, which is one of the things that we're really interested in as it pertains to Scooby Doo Mystery Incorporated. But before we get to that stage, I'd love to build a history of your animation career in terms of writing and stuff. And just looking at IMDb, I can see that you first started writing for animation in 1998. But before that point, what kick-started your path into becoming a writer?
Well, I moved to LA in 1995 to be a writer for television. I had just gotten a screenwriting degree from graduate school. And so my goal was to write for primetime drama out here. And I had an agent when I moved out. And my agent was able to get me meetings with mostly animation studios because they were more willing to look at new talent at that time than the studio networks were. I came out here to write primetime drama. My agents got me meetings with animation studios. Nothing really came out of that right away. But in the interim, I got a job as a writer's assistant on a primetime show that was produced by Aaron Spelling of Beverly Hills 90210 fame. And that turned into a writing gig on the show for a couple of months. And then the show was canceled. And I was, in despair and ready to move back to where I had come from and pick up a different career or something. And then I got a call from my agent saying, "Are you still willing to do animation?" And I said, "Gee, yeah, of course." And they said, "Well, there's a company called Klasky Chupo, and they do Rugrats, and they'd like to meet with you about a new show that they have coming out called The Wild Thornberrys." And I said, "Great, I'd love to talk to them." And so they gave me a freelance script. That went well. They put me on staff, and that was how I started in animation. So my first jobs were on shows like Wild Thornberrys and Rugrats before moving on to other shows that had more of a superhero kind of content.
Amazing. And certainly sounds like you say, taking that risk and moving before, to get into the industry and everything. What kind of was the background in doing that? Was there any writers that you'd, felt inspired by or anything like that that, made you sure that this was the career for you?
Well, I grew up on comic books, and so comic books were sort of always my first love. I didn't know how one broke into writing comics, and it seemed to me that writing television, at least there was, while it's not a definite path to getting in, there at least is a clearer path to doing that than I knew of to get into comic books. So I thought that was about as close as maybe I was going to get, and I was lucky. Caught some breaks, and eventually those breaks led to even writing some comic books. So I wound up sort of backing into what I had really always wanted to do since I was about 6 years old.
Oh, that's amazing.
No, it absolutely is incredible. And one thing that is a bit of a curiosity here is when I first started to do all these, like, I expected to get a lot of people watching that were fans of Scooby Doo, but what actually happened as well is a lot of people that tuned in are people that are aspiring to follow in the footsteps of the people that we have on here. So, to that end, what would your advice be to people watching this that aspire to either write comic books or write for animation?
I would say always be writing. That's the most important thing, is to always have some project you're working on, some script you're working on. You get better as a writer the more you do it. So the key is to always keep those fingers moving on the keyboard. Second to that is watch the shows that you really love or read the comics that you really like, and then try and break them down and find out why they work so well for you, why you like them so much, what their structures are, the way that the characters are developed over the course of a story, what the beats of a story are, learn the format, and apply that to the work that you're doing on your own. Um, getting to know the kinds of shows that you want to write for, and I wouldn't pick just one. As much as everybody loves Scooby and I love Scooby as well, you want to be able to write for as many different kinds of shows as possible. Study those kinds of shows that you respond to, figure out why you respond, and then try and put that into your own work.
It's fantastic because like going through your IMDb and just like everything that you've done, there's so many shows that I can pick out, and like they're literally shows that I would watch on repeat as a child, and even now, like so many things that have just aged miraculously well. For example, the 2000s Teen Titans show, that's still like such a classic. And I'd like to ask, if you don't mind, like, how did your work on that show come about?
I had worked on a show called Jackie Chan Adventures, and the writer's assistant on that show, who later became a staff writer on that show and a story editor, became a good friend of mine. His name is David Slack, and he has gone on to write a lot of other things, including a lot of primetime television now. And when David was chosen as the story editor on Teen Titans, he asked me if I wanted to come over and write a couple of episodes for their show, which I did and had the time of my life doing it. And that's really what led to me writing actual comic books. I was in a recording booth watching one of my scripts get recorded, and there was an editor from DC there, and spoke to him. And it turned out I had another friend who was an editor at DC, a friend from college. And so I reconnected with him. And then I went on a visit to New York for another reason, and I was given a tour of the DC offices, which was a lot of fun, by my friend Ivan Cohen, who was the editor, and he introduced me to the editor of the Teen Titans Go comic book. I asked if I could pitch story ideas to him, and he said, "Why would you want to do that? You write for the show." I said, "Because it's comics." And he said, "Okay, yeah, sure, send me some ideas." So I sent him an idea. He liked it. I wrote it. And then a month or two later, I was writing the Justice League Unlimited comic book, and that started my time with DC.
Wow, that's amazing. And it's so good to hear that, like you say, you got that transition into doing the thing you dreamed about since you were 6 years old, which, you know, is what we all aspire to do. And I mean, can I ask, 'cause like JayBee said, we're huge both fans of this series. So when you were working on Teen Titans, was there a certain character that you really enjoyed writing for the most, or anything like that?
I think I enjoyed writing Robin the most. And indeed, I wound up writing the Robin comic book for DC. Different character, but same general idea of who Robin was. But I always am fascinated by the characters that don't have powers and how they relate to characters that do have powers, how they view themselves in relation to those kinds of characters, and just sort of how they train, how they figure out what kind of hero they want to be, and how they go about it. I've always liked those kinds of characters.
No, certainly. And another show, again, like JayBee said, we could spend all day going through the IMDb history, but just to name a couple, you worked on you know, various iterations of Ben 10, and one question kind of because of that is, how do you find writing for different iterations of the same show? Is it kind of you get given a different brief every time? Is it that so kind of you get told to go back to the kind of core source material each time, or things like that when you're writing different things for the same franchise?
Well, you definitely want to know the history of the franchise and have the basic idea of what the general series is about. But if there's a different iteration of it, and you're brought in and asked to write an episode of it, you want to read and study as much material as they have on that iteration of the show. And generally speaking, those shows will have their own, what we call a Bible, that has all the information about the characters and the stories they've done so far and the stories they may be thinking about, has information on the locations and the supporting cast. You want to know all of that so that you can be well prepared to come in and pitch a show that they might, or an episode that they might be interested in doing. So you treat it like it's a brand new show, but with familiar boundaries to the sandbox that you've already played in with the characters in previous iterations, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that is incredible, because I know that a lot of, you know, different writers that we've spoken to have spoken about that Bible, especially as it pertains to Scooby Doo, as there's so many iterations of that show, and like there's so much, like, I guess, lore, if you want to call it like that, to fit into it. And so prior to your work writing on Mystery Incorporated, how familiar were you with that franchise?
I was very familiar with it. I grew up on it like everybody else in the entire universe. I watched it when I was a little kid, and I was fascinated by it. I thought it was hilarious. I loved that it didn't take itself too seriously, that there were a lot of tongue-in-cheek elements. They sort of winked to the audience. I loved all that stuff. And also, I loved seeing the different monsters and the different kinds of ghosts that would show up on a week-to-week basis. What are they going to do this time? What's the ghost going to be like? And as a little kid, I was just really excited to find that out every week. So I had a pretty good understanding of who the characters were, what they were all about. I was, older, of course, when I started working on the show, so I knew all of the pop culture kitschy kind of value that the series had taken on, all the things that the fans loved about it that had become regular staples or tropes whenever talking about the Scooby Doo. You meddling kids, all that stuff that had become part of the lingo. Everybody knows where it comes from. So that helped me out a lot too when I got a chance to work on Mystery Incorporated.
Mystery Incorporated is definitely a show that we hold near and dear to us, and one thing that did so well was all the character work, and it's just you could tell that the people that, of course, like you that were writing it, had a lot of care for the story that they were telling. And so to that end, I wanted to ask, did you have a favorite member of the Mystery Inc. crew growing up, and did that change at all when writing for the show itself?
I was a big Fred fan. I think because in the original series, at least, he wasn't super developed aside from being handsome and wearing an ascot. Um, and I loved what Mitch Watson and the rest of the gang had done with him for Mystery Incorporated, making him as obsessed with traps as he was, and as oblivious to everything else as he was. I thought that was really fun, and he was just a blast to write and a blast to come up with ideas for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly something that Mr. Incorporated deserves a lot of credit for, is expanding characters like Fred, because Shaggy and Scooby have always had a wonderful amount of character, and it was just so nice to see some of the others kind of get equal treatment really there. And so the first episode that it does say that, and admittedly we take our knowledge from IMDb here just to kind of get confirmation on that, was Revenge of the Man Crab. So how did your work in Mr. Incorporated come about?
I can't, it's been a while, and I can't remember how I was introduced to Mitch Watson. It was either through my agents or it was through Sam Register, who was running Warner Brothers animation at the time, still is. But I had worked with Sam before, and so he may have recommended me to Mitch. I'm not sure, but Mitch and I met and we hit it off. He had seen my credit. He knew what I was capable of, the kinds of shows I had written for. He knew people that I had written for. And he thought I might be a good fit. So he tried me out on the Man Crab script, and we just sort of went from there and got weirder and weirder and weirder as we went along.
No, that's brilliant. And if that episode is anything to go by, I would certainly say it's a perfect fit, and we'd love to see more work with you and Scooby in the future. But more on the work with Mystery Incorporated, how did your work on that episode kind of go? Was it that you got given an initial pitch? Because obviously with Mystery Incorporated, it was one of the first series where we'd seen that overarching story, or was it that you kind of provided the pitch and wrote the episode from there?
No, the overarching story was already in place. And they had the basic idea for the Man Crab story. And so they had, what we call a log line, which is just one or two sentences that tells you what the basic story is about. And then once you're hired, you go in and sit down with the story editor, maybe the producers, directors on the art side, and you talk about what that story is going to be. You flesh it out beat by beat, moment by moment, scene by scene. And then you go away and you write that up as an outline. And you get notes on that, you rewrite it. You're sent to script, you write a draft of the script, you get notes, you write another draft, and it goes back and forth until either you run out of time or the story editor thinks that the story is in a good enough place. Most always, you run out of time.
Well, that's absolutely incredible. And the Man Crab episode had a lot of different things in place. I mean, you've mentioned that overarching story, and especially with that episode, it sets up quite a lot with the Mr. E character. Like, there's definitely seeds planted with what he had going on. And so, you've mentioned that they had that scope that had the story set out. Was all the stuff with Mr. E that had to, tie into the previous episode, the next episode, was all of that included within that pitch as well, or was that all kind of hashed out with the story editor?
That was hashed out with the story editor. They knew basically what they wanted to have happen in the episode as far as the overarching story was. And so they told me what that would be, and we worked together to fit it into the Man Crab story as we were going along. So that was more handled on their end than it was on mine.
Thank you so much. And then the next episode that you wrote, which is one of my personal favorites, that's the Shrieking Madness. And of course, that got so, I want to say, psychedelic and meta. It was incredible to see the character of Chagar Gothicon just stalking the halls of that campus, and especially all of the references to both Lovecraft and Harlan Ellison. When writing that, how much research did you have to put into, all the Lovecraftian side of things and Harlan Ellison?
Not a lot, to be honest with you, because I was familiar with the tropes of Lovecraft and the basic idea of the gothic nature of the horror. And Harlan Ellison, was a legend and a character in his own right. And I had never met him before, but I certainly knew his work. I knew his reputation and all of that entailed. I had heard a zillion stories about Harlan. So I didn't have to do a ton of research into him. Mitch Watson had met Harlan before, had known him, had been friendly with him. And apparently Harlan had been a huge fan of Scooby Doo all the way along and had always wanted to be in an episode. And so Mitch had asked him if he wanted to do an episode of Mystery Incorporated, and Harlan said yes. And Mitch called me up after we did the first script and said, "How would you like to write a script with Harlan Allison as a character?" And I said, "Oh my God, it's the end of my career because Harlan will kill me." He said, "You don't have to worry about it because Harlan will rewrite everything that you write anyway, so don't worry." I said, "Okay, whatever." So I wrote the script, and Harlan played it to perfection. He did rewrite every line. He, I think, had a great time, and it was one of the best experiences of my writing career.
That's amazing. I mean, there is so many episodes that's prominent for so many reasons. And I think another two that really, I think from an audience perspective, stand out for many reasons is The Menace of the Manticore and The House of the Nightmare Witch. And one of the reasons being, I'd like to say one of many, being the character Hot Dog Water, which was voiced by Linda Cardellini. And I know that so many people were happy to see her make a return. So when you were working on the series, did you know that she was going to be voicing that character?
No, I had no idea. I didn't know, frequently the voice actors are different from the characters who have played or the actors who have played them in other iterations or in movies or in television. So I had no idea. And I was thrilled once I heard that she was going to be playing the part, that she was going to be there. I'm a big fan. I go back to Freaks and Geeks and how much I enjoy her work. And Hot Dog Water is such an amazing and interesting and weird character. Just the idea of a character named Hot Dog Water still blows my mind. But every detail of this show was like that. It was just everything was one detail weirder than the next, and that was Mitch and the gang. They had all this stuff that they came up with. I don't know how they did it. I don't know if it was just really late at night and they were really tired and ideas popped into their head or what. But they came up with great stuff, and it was just a joy to implement these scripts.
It certainly seemed like they had their own rule book. I mean, I don't think there is many shows other than Scooby that could manage to have a character called Hot Dog Water and still make it work, but they did, and they did it well.
We got away with so much on that show that it's really kind of incomprehensible. And it definitely played well to older audiences as well as to kids. The basic mysteries were still there. The tropes that everybody loved were still there. But my God, some of the relationship stuff was just bonkers for the time. Some of the menaces that they came up with, the guest stars. I mean, Harlan Ellison in a kids cartoon. I'm still amazed that we were able to get some of that stuff on the air the way that it did, and it came out so well.
It certainly did. And like you said, there was certainly a wide range of ideas, and admittedly I think they all worked quite well. But do you remember if there were ever any episode plots spoken about, or any ideas that perhaps were one level of crazy too far, or that perhaps didn't make the show?
Nothing. I don't remember anything specific, but I'm sure that when we were sitting around in the room coming up with beats, as inevitably happens, you come up with something that is so crazy and outrageous just because it's going to make the other people in the room giggle. And you giggle, and then you say, "We can't do that." And it's like, "Yeah, right. We can't. Even we can't do that." I don't remember specifically what that might have been, but I'm sure that there were ideas that got thrown against the wall that did not stick.
Well, we're definitely glad that so much did stick, because it obviously led to such an iconic show that's going to last the test of time, I'm sure. But out of all the episodes that you wrote, is there one that stands out to you as one that you like, that's your favorite?
I'm so fond of the Harlan Allison episode, just because it was a chance to meet him and work with him. And he was nothing but generous and kind and nice to me. He had me over to his house after the show had been recorded. He wanted me to sign his copy of the script. And I had taken a picture with him, and he wanted a copy of that. And I wanted to get a book that he had written signed, and so he signed that. And it, I don't know how much you've heard about Harlan. He had the most incredible house here in Los Angeles that you've ever seen. And it was called Ellis in Wonderland. And it was enormous. It was the kind of house that he just kept building onto. So it was just a sprawling thing, and every single surface was lined with books. There were books everywhere, bookshelves everywhere, books on the floor, books in stacks, books in piles, books tossed around, incredible art on the walls, photos, and just stories. And you could listen to him tell stories about his life forever. So the fact that the show led to that afternoon at Harlan's house makes that an incredibly special experience to me, and one that I'll never forget.
That just sounds absolutely amazing. I know, like, personally being book lovers on this end as well, like that notion just sounds like an absolute dream house. And you may have answered my next question with that. Is there any moments or highlights from your time working on Mystery Incorporated that stand out to you?
Yeah, well, yeah. And I'm going back to Harlan. Sorry, but when we recorded his episode, Mitch was kind enough to let me sit in. I didn't have any role there except if they needed to tweak a line once in a while. They might ask me for an idea. But Harlan was in the recording booth with the rest of the regular cast. And I'm not telling any stories out of school here. Anybody who knows anything about Harlan knows this is true. And Harlan was attracting a lot of gravity in the room. Everything was sort of around Harlan, which is understandable. And he was at the point where he was not only rewriting his own lines, but he was telling the actors how they should say their line. And so we came to a break point, and Harlan requested to go to the restroom. And the voice director and Mitch and everybody in the room sort of turned to me and said, "Keep Harlan out in the hall so we can get some work done." And then when the sign goes off, the on-air sign or whatever recording sign goes off, he can come back in. But keep him out there and chat with him so that we can actually get the script recorded without all the interruptions. And I said, okay. And I stepped out into the hall, and Harlan came back from the bathroom, and I started asking him about writing comics, the comics that he had written for before. Talked to him about Star Trek, because, he wrote a legendary episode, or he's credited with writing a legendary episode of the series. There was a whole big lawsuit about that. And, once you engage Harlan in conversation, it's hard to get him to stop. And so we talked for about 45 minutes just standing out in the hall. And then he said, shouldn't I be in there recording? And I said, oh yeah. So he went back in, and of course they had done the recording of the rest of the script, and Harlan finished his work, and everybody went their separate ways. But the chance to stand out in the hall with Harlan and chat with him for the first time was really cool.
Well, that's absolutely incredible. That's just amazing to hear all those behind the scenes details that you'd never really have thought of beforehand. But I suppose, transitioning now onto the future and what's going on currently, are you currently working on any projects that you're able to speak about at all, or anything new that you've done that's recently been released?
Well, there's a strike going on here. And so, like a lot of other writers, I've been picketing and participating in the strike. So there aren't a lot of jobs that I could take, and things were pretty slow even before the strike. So I'm picking up little freelance stuff here and there, stuff that I can't really talk about. A lot of animation work is not covered by the Writers Guild, but I'm also part of the Animation Guild, and the Animation Guild, of course, is in deep sympathy with the Writers Guild. So there's a line between the kind of work that I can take and the kind of work that I shouldn't take. So I'm picking up what I can. A lot of it is pretty small, but the last show that I worked on for an extended period of time was Lego City Adventures, and that was season 4, I believe, of that show, and that has been on Netflix, I believe, for a couple years now. And that was the last show that I was on for any length of time, and that was a great experience too.
Perfect. And I guess, again, like JayBee was saying, looking to the future, is there a good place that people can keep up with your work as and when you are able to announce things? Because I appreciate you work on things quite far in advance.
Sure. Well, I have a website, and that's adambeechen.com. And people can go there and check out my credits and, other dithering thoughts that I may have had somewhere along the way. You can find me on Twitter at Sonova, SONNOVA. And if you put Sonova together with my last name, you kind of get the joke, Sonova Beechen. So that's the Twitter handle. And those are the best places to find me.
Oh, that's absolutely incredible. And that does wrap up the questions that we had for you today. Thank you so much for all the time you've given us and for being so giving with your answers, because we've definitely learned a lot of really cool things. So thank you so much for that.
My pleasure. I'm happy to talk about the show anytime, and thank you guys for your passion and commitment as fans of the characters.
Well, thank you. That definitely does mean a lot. And I'd like to thank everyone watching this, because they're the people that kind of keep this going as well, because it's great to have that feedback and have that interaction as well. So thank you everyone for watching. If you do want to see more, all of our links will be in the link tree as well, along with all the links to everyone's websites and contact information. It's going to be absolutely incredible. So yeah, if you do want to see more, then please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.